She was just a child, one of two, standing frozen on the sidewalk, her finger trembling as it pointed at the bus door. Her sister clutched her hand, both girls too afraid to speak. And then, a man, quiet, grieving not yet whole, stepped forward. He didn't know it yet, but what he did next would unravel a silence no one dared to name, and begin a healing no one expected. If stories of quiet courage, unexpected kindness, and second chances speak to your soul, we invite you to stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to Soul Moments Story for more heartfelt tales that remind us sometimes the smallest actions change everything. Now let us begin. Jack Turner wasn't supposed to be on that street corner. His work truck had blown a tire a few blocks away, and rather than wait on hold with roadside assistance, he decided to walk the girls, Lily and Rose, to the bus stop. It wasn't their first day of school, nor a particularly cold one for March. But something about that morning buzzed faintly in his chest, like an instinct he hadn't used in a long time was waking up. The sun hadn't fully climbed over the rooftops yet, and the sleepy neighborhood still wore its hush like a soft winter blanket. Houses looked like they were holding their breath. That's when he saw them. The twin girls were standing frozen on the curb, backpacks slumped behind their tiny shoulders, staring at the approaching school bus with a stillness that didn't belong to children. They weren't bouncing in place or adjusting their hats like usual. They weren't giggling or whispering. They were stiff, pale, eyes locked on the bus like it was something other than a way to get to school, like it was something dangerous. And then Rose raised her arm and pointed. The bus rumbled closer, yellow paint dulled by age wheels groaning. The metal door creaked open with a familiar hiss. That's when Jack noticed Lily's hand, trembling, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. She reached out and gripped her sister's wrist tightly. Neither moved toward the steps. Jack's boots crunched on the pavement as he stepped forward. "Hey," he said, softly squatting down so he wasn't towering over them. "You two okay?" Lily shook her head almost imperceptibly. Her lips moved, but her voice didn't come out. Jack leaned in. Rose leaned toward him and whispered, barely audible, like her voice was afraid to make sound. "He's there again." Jack turned to look. Through the bus's wide front window, he saw the driver, a gray-haired man with sunken cheeks, eyes dull and unfocused. He wasn't looking at the kids. He wasn't smiling or waving, just sitting, waiting. Nothing overtly wrong, but everything in Jack's gut twisted. The driver was still, too still, and the girls feared this wasn't pretend. It wasn't the kind of nervousness kids get over quizzes or cafeteria pizza. It was bone deep, remembered. "Do you want me to take you to school?" Jack asked. Two nods, simultaneous. He raised a hand to the bus driver, just a polite wave, not an accusation. The man nodded, once slow, then pulled the lever. The doors hissed shut. The bus drove off. Jack didn't move for a moment. He watched the bus round the corner and vanish behind a line of bare trees. The air felt heavier. The drive to school was quiet. Lily sat in the middle seat of the truck, hands in her lap. Rose stared out the window, chewing the sleeve of her coat. Jack wasn't a parent by blood. He had been their neighbor for 2 years, since their aunt, who had full custody, moved into the house next door. After her stroke last month, he'd stepped in more and more. Morning cereal, walks to the bus, a story here and there. But until now, he'd never felt like a guardian. Today felt different. He pulled into the parking lot and helped them down. "I'll talk to your teacher," he said. Lily clutched his sleeve. "Don't say it loud. Please." Jack knelt again. "I won't. I promise." She looked into his eyes for a long moment, as if searching for something. Trust. Maybe safety. Then she nodded. Grace Miller was standing outside her classroom door when Jack arrived, still holding both girls by the hand. She was 33, with kind eyes and a warmth about her that made children want to tell her secrets. But the moment she saw their faces, really saw them, her smile faltered. "They didn't want to take the bus today," Jack said carefully. Grace lowered herself to Lily's eye level. "Do you want to come inside and color with me?" The girls nodded. Grace opened the door and ushered them in, then returned to Jack. "Did they say anything?" Jack hesitated. Just that the driver was there again. It scared them. Her expression shifted. Concern, not surprise. Not quite shock either. "Holloway," she murmured. "He's been with the district a long time." "That mean he's trustworthy?" Jack asked. Grace looked past him toward the glass window, where the girls were already sitting drawing. "Not always," she said. "But he's known." Jack folded his arms. "So was the guy who messed up my daughter's surgery 5 years ago." That silenced her. "I'm not trying to make a scene," Jack added, "but I saw something real this morning. Not a tantrum, not a game. They were scared out of their minds." Grace met his eyes. "Let me talk to the principal." He nodded. "And I'll keep driving them myself, at least for now." She hesitated, then gently. "That might be for the best." As Jack walked back to his truck, he noticed something strange. His hands were shaking. It wasn't just about Holloway. It wasn't even just about the girls. It was something deeper, older. Something he hadn't let himself feel in years. The last time he'd seen a child that afraid she was lying in a hospital bed, and he couldn't do a damn thing. But today he did. He didn't know it yet, but this morning wasn't just about protecting 2 little girls. It was the moment Jack Turner came back to life. Grace Miller had always believed in listening with her whole body, not just her ears, not just with polite nods or comforting smiles, with her eyes, her stillness, her instinct. Years ago, when she was barely old enough to rent her first apartment, a professor in her education program said something she'd never forgotten. Children don't always speak with words. The truth often shows up in what they don't say. So that morning, as she watched Lily and Rose settle quietly at the coloring table in her classroom, Grace didn't start asking questions right away. She sat across the room, sipping coffee gone cold, and just observed. Rose drew a row of houses under a big sun. Lily, however, drew a school bus. Again. It wasn't the first time she'd drawn one. Over the past few weeks, Grace had seen versions of it scribbled into margins, the edges of spelling tests, even the back of a math worksheet. Always the same shape. Same slanted windows. But there was one detail that repeated every single time. Seat number 5 was empty. All was outlined in thick black crayon, sometimes scribbled over completely, and always with a faint shadow beside it. Today, Lily paused after finishing the outline and shaded the seat again. This time, she added something new, a pair of shoes on the floor beside the seat. Unlaced. Facing sideways. Grace's stomach turned, not from fear, but recognition. Because there was a time in the 3rd grade when she herself used to draw lockers. And every locker was locked except one, the one she'd been shoved into once by a group of older girls. No one ever believed her. Her mother called it a phase. Her teacher had smiled gently and said, "Grace is very imaginative." Sometimes the language of trauma was too quiet for grown-ups to hear. At lunch, Grace stood in the hallway sipping from her water bottle when Principal Evans approached. "Hey, Grace," he said, in that breezy corporate tone she'd come to dread. "You flagged something in your morning report." She nodded. "Yes." "Regarding the bus driver, Mr. Holloway. I think we need to reevaluate his route at least while we assess what's going on." Evans raised an eyebrow. "What exactly is going on?" Grace hesitated. 2 students refused to board this morning. They showed signs of fear. It wasn't minor. He waved a hand like brushing away crumbs. "We've had Holloway for years. Parents love him. He brings his own cookies to the school bake sale, for God's sake." I'm not questioning his cookie recipe, Grace said evenly. I'm telling you something is wrong. Evans exhaled. Look, I'll put in a note with district transportation. But unless there's a formal complaint from a parent, there is, Grace cut in. Jack Turner. He witnessed it himself, and he drove the girls here instead. Evans stiffened slightly. Jack Turner, the carpenter. The one whose daughter passed away, Grace nodded once. That's him. Evans glanced down the hall. Grace. Sometimes people who've gone through a trauma can be sensitive. They see ghosts where there aren't any. Her expression didn't flinch. And sometimes they're the only ones who notice the ghosts because they've lived with them. Evans's mouth flattened. I'll make a call. That afternoon, Jack returned to pick the girls up. He didn't come to the classroom door. Grace found him leaning on the fence behind the playground, arms crossed, watching the kids from a distance. I figured you'd circle back, she said. Joining him. He didn't smile, but his voice was calm. I didn't want to make a scene. You didn't, she said. You protected them. He nodded slowly. That's what I'm trying to do. They stood in silence for a few moments, both watching Lily and Rose play on the swings. They looked like normal kids again, laughing hair blowing in the breeze. But something still hung in the air. A tension not quite named. Do you know what seat they usually sit in? Grace asked. Jack looked confused for a second. No. Why Lily draws the same thing every time. A bus, same angle, same row of windows. But one seat, always the fifth one, is marked different. Like it's cursed, empty, or worse. He ran a hand across the back of his neck. I don't think she's just drawing. No, Grace agreed. She's remembering. He turned toward her, his jaw tight. If this guy hurt them, we don't know that, she said gently. But I think we need to know what they remember. Jack looked back toward the girls. They trust you. I hope so. You're the first adult they haven't flinched from. That stung. Grace looked away. She hadn't asked for that kind of responsibility. But somehow, she felt it settling into her chest, like a weight she couldn't ignore. That evening, as she was locking her classroom, Grace noticed something tucked into her mailbox in the teacher's lounge. A piece of folded paper, no envelope. She opened it. A child's drawing. Another school bus. Again, seat number 5 was blacked out. But this time, a small red X was drawn on the door. Grace stared at it for a long time. The door, not the seat. Something happened at the door. She turned the paper over. In crooked handwriting I didn't get off. He said, wait. Then the door closed again. Her hand trembled. She reached for her phone and typed, Jack, can we talk tonight? I think this goes deeper than we thought. Back at home, Jack stared at the photo of his daughter Sarah on the mantel. He remembered the last time she looked at him before going into surgery. She hadn't been scared. She had smiled brave and bright. He'd promised to be right there when she woke up. She never did. And for 5 years, he'd buried every instinct to protect every twitch of his heart that warned him to care again. Because it hurt too damn much. But those girls next door. The way Lily had reached for his hand. The way Rose's voice shook. Jack closed his eyes. Maybe he couldn't save Sarah. But maybe he'd been given one more chance. The coffee at Jack's kitchen table had gone cold again. He didn't notice. His elbows rested on the worn wood as he stared at the paper in front of him, lined notebook paper folded into thirds. The drawing Grace had handed him the night before was laid open like evidence in a courtroom. Seat number 5, the red X on the door, the scribbled sentence written by a hand that still couldn't form capital letters. Properly, I didn't get off. He said, wait. Then the door closed again. He'd read those words 15 times and still couldn't breathe right. Wait for what? He muttered under his breath, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Why didn't you get off, sweetheart?" In the living room, Lily and Rose were curled on the couch watching a nature show. Jack had kept them home from school today, said it was for rest, though the truth was he didn't want to let them out of his sight. Not until he had answers. A knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find Grace holding a paper bag and 2 coffee cups. "You look like you skipped breakfast this morning," she said, simply stepping inside. Jack gave a weary smile. "You weren't wrong." She placed the coffees on the table, glanced at the drawing. "You couldn't stop staring either, huh?" I kept thinking, what if it was Sarah? That was the first time he'd said his daughter's name to someone in months, maybe years. Grace didn't speak. She just nodded, sat across from him and let the silence settle in. The kind of silence people who've known. Grief, respect. A silence that didn't need to be filled. They spent the next hour comparing notes. Grace had gone back through her classroom files, searching for behavioral patterns. She noted Lily had started showing signs of anxiety around 2 months ago, frequent bathroom breaks during math hour, clinging to her twin at recess, occasional panic when the bus was mentioned. "What about Rose?" Jack asked. Quieter. But her drawings started shifting too. "I used to get flowers and rainbows. Now I get doors. Always half closed." Jack exhaled sharply. So this wasn't sudden. No. We just didn't see it. That admission hit them both. Later that morning, they met with Principal Evans in his office. Grace brought her notes. Jack brought his presence and a quiet resolve that carried weight. Evans seemed more defensive than curious. "We appreciate your concern," he said, hands folded too tightly. "But let's remember children have active imaginations, especially twins. They can feed each other's ideas." Jack leaned forward, voice low and steady. "Imagination doesn't make a child afraid to step onto a school bus. It doesn't draw red X's on doors." Evans hesitated. "Mr. Holloway has no prior complaints. No official ones," Grace corrected. "But I called a colleague at Brookfield Elementary. Holloway worked there until 2 years ago. A student named Madison Albright stopped coming to school shortly after a bus incident." Evans blinked. "You're connecting a dot with no line between them." Grace placed a copy of Lily's drawing on the desk. "This is the line." Evans looked down. His mouth opened, then closed again. Finally, he sighed. "I'll file a provisional report to District Transportation. Holloway will be reassigned to non-student duties, pending internal review." Jack didn't relax. "And in the meantime, we'll assign a substitute driver starting tomorrow." It wasn't everything, but it was movement. Back at school, Jack waited in the hallway while Grace returned to her classroom. When she came out 10 minutes later, she looked like she'd aged a year. "They asked to talk," she said quietly. "Just the 2 of them and me. I gave them crayons and paper, and a little recorder just in case." Jack's eyebrows lifted. "Is that allowed? I'm not publishing it. I just wanted their voices, in case we need it." He followed her outside where they stood near the oak tree lining the staff parking lot. The spring air had started to turn, softening the breeze. "They told me Holloway used to drive past their stop sometimes," Grace said. "Make them wait longer." One time he stopped short just after they got on. Made Lily fall. Jack clenched his jaw. They said he would sometimes talk to them in a whisper, things they couldn't understand. Just words that felt wrong. Rose said it was like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. Jack turned toward her, eyes wide. He was speaking to himself, I don't know. Maybe. But they both said something else. Grace paused. "He told Lily once, 'You sit in 5 like she did.'" Jack felt the words punch the breath out of him. She, who they don't know. He shook his head slowly. Voice raw. "Something's off. Not just creepy. Wrong." Grace nodded. "I'm going to dig into Holloway's record, and I'm going to find out what happened to Madison Albright." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Every floorboard creak felt like a whisper from behind a closed door. He walked into the girls' room and stood in the doorway. They were fast asleep, Rose's hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. He leaned against the frame and closed his eyes. You sit in 5 like she did. What did it mean? Was there someone before them? Someone no one remembered. He stepped closer and gently adjusted the blanket around Lily. Her brow furrowed in sleep. He smoothed her hair back and whispered, "You're safe now." Then he walked back down the hallway and turned on the porch light. And he stood there, hands in pockets, back straight, watching the street as if it might offer an answer. He didn't know it yet, but the past was about to knock again. And this time, it wouldn't whisper. The library at Brookfield Elementary was smaller than Grace remembered. She stood in the entryway, the scent of old books and lemon polish tugging at faded memories. Sunlight slanted through high windows, casting soft rectangles on the carpet. It had been nearly 7 years since she last visited this campus. Everything looked the same, and nothing felt the same. A young librarian, no older than 25, led her to the records room tucked behind a metal door in the back hallway. "I'm not sure what you'll find," the woman said, adjusting her glasses. "Our paper files only go back 10 years. Most student records are digital now." "I'll take what I can get," Grace replied, offering a grateful nod. The librarian handed her a folder with a yellow post-it note labeled Madison Albright. "I remember her actually," the woman said quietly. "She was in my older sister's class. Sweet girl." Quiet. Grace hesitated. "Do you remember why she left the school?" A pause, a glance down. She just stopped showing up. "I don't think anyone talked about it much. Not officially." Grace's fingers tightened slightly on the folder. "Thank you," she said, and stepped into the small reading cubicle to sit alone. The folder was thin, unsettlingly so. A few test scores, a drawing of a butterfly tucked into a report card envelope, and a behavior note dated February 4th through a boitort. Madison appeared withdrawn and unfocused today, spoke in hushed tones to herself, expressed fear of riding alone, advised parents via email. That was the only mention of concern. No follow-up, no confirmation from parents, no documentation of a transfer. Madison had simply disappeared, not into darkness, but into silence. Grace swallowed hard. She pulled out her notebook and began writing. Back in the present, Jack had decided to make a stop of his own. He stood at the front desk of the district transportation office, a drab building with scuffed linoleum floors and a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. The clerk behind the glass partition glanced at him with vague disinterest. "I'm looking for driver reassignment records," Jack said, specifically regarding a man named Holloway. "Leonard Holloway." The clerk blinked. "Are you family?" "Number employee, no." She gave a rehearsed sigh. "We can't release employment history to private citizens," Jack exhaled slowly. "He's been driving my neighbor's kids. One of them is afraid to go to school. If you can't help me, who can?" The woman hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. Off the record, Jack nodded. There were whispers, she said. Not official. No write-ups. But Holloway was reassigned from Brookfield after a parent showed up here with a drawing. Said their daughter wouldn't stop crying after a bus ride. Holloway denied everything. The girl stopped coming to school a week later. Jack's breath caught. Her name wouldn't happen to be Madison, would it? The woman blinked in surprise. Yeah. How'd you know? He didn't answer. He turned and walked out the door. Later that afternoon, Grace and Jack met at a small diner halfway between their neighborhoods. The waitress poured coffee without asking. Neither of them reached for the sugar. It was one of those moments where caffeine felt like a defense mechanism against the things they couldn't unsee. Grace placed the folder on the table between them. No withdrawal paperwork. No school transfer. Nothing. It's like Madison fell off the map. She didn't fall, Jack said quietly. She was let go. Grace looked at him. You found something. He nodded. District office. Holloway was reassigned quietly. Parent complaint. A drawing. Sound familiar. They sat in silence, the noise of the diner fading into the background. Then Jack leaned forward. I want to find her. Madison, he nodded. She might be the key. Grace exhaled. I'll reach out to a friend who works in child welfare. Maybe she can help track where the family went. Jack traced the rim of his mug with one finger, if they're still together. Grace didn't answer. Back at Jack's house, Lily sat cross-legged in the living room flipping through a picture book. Rose was coloring, humming softly to herself. Jack returned with Grace in tow. The girls smiled shyly at her. Lily stood up and walked over, holding out a folded piece of paper. Grace knelt and accepted it. Inside was a new drawing, a school bus again. But this time it was different. The door was missing, just a blank space where the entrance should have been. Jack peered over her shoulder. What happened to the door, sweetheart? He asked. Lily glanced at Rose, then whispered, He closed it. She was still there. Grace felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Who she asked gently. But Lily only shook her head and sat back down. That night, Grace sat on her bed, laptop open, trying to track down anything about Madison Albright. The name brought up nothing unusual. No obituaries, no runaway notices, not even a high school photo, as if she'd been erased. She ran a hand through her hair and leaned back against the headboard, mind racing. He closed the door. She was still there. What if Madison had been left on that bus? What if Holloway had driven off with her still inside? The possibility chilled her blood. Even if nothing happened in a criminal sense, the emotional damage could have been permanent. Grace clicked open a blank document. Title: Preliminary Report. Psychological distress among bus Route 7 passengers. She began typing. This time she wouldn't be quiet. The wind across the playground carried the smell of spring and freshly cut grass, but Lily Parker sat alone beneath the oak tree, near the far fence. Knees pulled up to her chest, coat sleeves tugged down over her hands. Recess was usually the best part of the day, but not lately. Across the yard, Grace Miller stood near the jungle gym clipboard, in hand pretending to monitor the group of second graders climbing the monkey bars. In truth, her eyes kept drifting to Lily. The twins had been different all week, not in a loud, disruptive way, in a softer, heavier way. Rose stayed closer to Lily than usual. They whispered more, avoided the swings, drew more pictures of windows and doors. Jack was still driving them to school every morning, and Grace had found herself walking them out to his truck most afternoons. Today she'd quietly arranged for Rose to join another class during recess. Just 15 minutes, enough time for Lily to have a moment of her own. She walked slowly across the field and sat down beside her. Lily didn't look up. She was sketching with a piece of red sidewalk chalk directly onto the dirt beneath her shoes. Lines, a rectangle, a set of steps. You draw a lot of buses, Grace said gently. Lily shrugged. I remember them. Grace tilted her head. Do you want to talk about what you remember? Silence. Then it's loud. When the door closes, it's too loud, and the inside gets cold. Grace nodded. Did something happen inside the bus that scared you? Lily looked up, then her eyes wide and alert, but not panicked. Thoughtful. Guarded. He talks like someone else is there. Who, the driver? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Holloway. He says things when it's just us. Not bad words, but like there's another kid. Grace's heart beat faster. Did he ever touch you? Or Rose Lily's eyes widened and she shook her head violently. No, not like that. A pause. He says we have to sit in 5. Like she did. That's what he says. But we don't know who she is. Grace inhaled. Steady. Measured. Did you ever see her? The girl he's talking about. Lily picked up another piece of chalk, this one blue, and drew a small figure on the bus steps. Alone. No face. No name. She wears a red jacket, she whispered. But her shoes don't make sound. Grace froze. A red jacket. She hadn't told Lily anything about Madison Albright, about the note in the file. But it had mentioned a red jacket. Did she talk to you? Lily nodded so slowly it was almost imperceptible. She said, "Don't stay on after dark." Grace swallowed hard. When did she say that last week? On the bus, number. Lily looked up again, her eyes a little less sure this time. In the hallway. When I was by the lockers alone. Grace felt a chill climb her spine. This wasn't imagination. It was memory. But it was blurred with something more fragile. Possibly something Madison had once said. Now passed along like a secret echo down the years. After school, Jack met Grace in the parking lot. He leaned on the hood of his truck, hands in his coat pockets. How was today? Grace glanced back toward the school building. Progress. And more questions. She told him about the conversation with Lily, the red jacket, the girl with soundless shoes. Jack listened quietly the way he always did, taking it in, not interrupting, waiting until she finished. I don't think she's imagining this, Grace said. She's describing a memory she couldn't possibly have made up. And if we're right, Madison wore a red jacket the day she vanished. Jack shook his head slowly. That's not coincidence. No, it's not. He glanced at the twins in the back seat, buckling their belts. So, where do we go from here? I'm filing a full report tomorrow with the school district and child protection services, Grace said. And I think we try to find Madison. If she's out there, she deserves to know that someone listened. Jack nodded, but his jaw tightened. And if she isn't? The unspoken hung in the air. If Madison had been hurt. If this went deeper than just psychological damage. Grace didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, Rose tiptoed into the garage where Jack was sanding a piece of maple for a kitchen cabinet project. He looked up, surprised. "Hey there, kiddo." She said nothing, just walked over and placed a folded paper in his hand, then turned and left. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and opened it. Another drawing. This time, it wasn't a bus. It was a face, or at least the suggestion of one. Eyes blank circles, no mouth, long hair, and beneath it one word scribbled in a child's uncertain hand. She's lonely. Jack stared at it for a long time. He thought of his daughter, of the nights he'd walked the hallway aching with a grief too large to speak aloud, of the loneliness he'd carried for 5 years without asking for help. And now 2 little girls were whispering about another child left behind, one no one remembered, one no one looked for. He reached for his phone and called Grace. "She's not gone," he said as soon as she picked up. "I know," she replied. "She's still in there somewhere, and I think the twins are the only ones who can show us where." In a quiet bedroom down the hall, Lily and Rose held hands in bed. Between them sat a small flashlight still glowing faintly. "Do you think she hears us?" Lily asked softly. Rose nodded. "I think she's waiting." Lily turned her face to the ceiling and whispered, "We're listening now." The rain started just after sunset, soft at first, then steady, then relentless. It drummed against Jack Turner's roof in rhythmic waves, a sound he usually found comforting. But tonight it echoed differently, deeper, as if the sky itself was pacing above him, unsettled and unable to rest. The girls were asleep. He'd checked twice, stood at the doorway with his arms folded, and eyes scanning the quiet rise and fall of their chests. Lily murmured in her sleep something about a window. Rose rolled over and reached for her sister's hand. Jack didn't say a word. He just stood there for a long time like a sentry. Then he moved down the hall, past the living room, past the photo frames he no longer turned over when company came and into the garage. The space still smelled like sawdust and varnish. It was cleaner than it used to be. After Sarah died, he hadn't stepped into it for months. When he finally returned, it was only to work, not to create. Building cabinets was safer than rebuilding memories. But tonight, his hands didn't reach for tools. They reached for the box. It sat on the top shelf in the corner, covered in a towel. A wooden keepsake chest he'd made himself, back when his daughter had been 6 years old and obsessed with the idea of saving things forever. He brought it down gently, brushing off dust with the sleeve of his flannel. His hands paused on the latch. Inside were the fragments of another life. A blue headband, a tiny drawing of a bird, a postcard from Yellowstone, and a hospital bracelet with Sarah's name printed in faded ink. Jack swallowed hard. He sat down on the cold garage floor, legs crossed like a child, and opened the last item in the box, a folded paper with crayon marks. A school bus. Sarah had drawn it the day before her surgery. She was proud of it, beaming from ear to ear, and had told him she wanted to give it to her bus driver, so he won't forget me when I miss a few days, she'd said. That bus driver had sent a card after the funeral. Jack never read it. Now, staring at the bus on the paper and the one in his mind, Lily's bus, Rose's bus, he felt the wall in his chest start to crack. He hadn't cried at the hospital, not at the funeral, not when he packed away her room. People said he was strong, but strength had nothing to do with it. It was numbness. It was survival. It was the absence of anything left to give. But tonight, with the memory of Madison hovering like a shadow, and the twins whispering about a ghost in red, the grief finally surfaced. Jack pressed his forehead to the edge of the box and wept. No sounds, no moans, just the quiet fall of tears on wood and paper. Tears for Sarah. Tears for the little girl no one looked for. Tears for the father he hadn't been when it mattered most. And somewhere in that rain-soaked silence, something shifted. He didn't want to be the man who stood still anymore. He wanted to move, to act, to protect, even if he didn't know what from yet. The next morning, Grace found him waiting outside her classroom door, wet from the rain, but calm. He held a paper in his hand. She glanced down. Sarah's bus drawing. She would have been 9 last month, Jack said, voice low. Grace looked up. She's why you stepped in, isn't she? He nodded. At first I thought I was protecting them, but now I think I was giving myself a second chance to show up when it matters. Grace placed her hand on his arm. You did. You are. Jack glanced around, then stepped closer. Did you find anything on Madison? Grace's face changed. I did. Sort of. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to an email. My friend in child services couldn't release much, but she said the family left the county about 6 months after Madison stopped attending school. No forwarding address. No custody record. No enrollment anywhere else. Nothing Jack asked. She said it's like they wanted to disappear. Jack looked away. Or they were told to. Grace nodded. We may not be able to find Madison, but we can make sure no one forgets her. That afternoon during free period, Grace invited Lily and Rose to stay in the classroom. The lights were dimmed. She played soft music. Let them pick glitter pens from her top drawer. We're going to make something, she said, for a friend who may not have anyone else left. Rose tilted her head. The girl with the red jacket, Grace nodded. The twins looked at each other, then opened their notebooks. They began to draw. Not buses this time. A door half open, and a girl looking out. On the next page, 2 other girls holding a sign. You can come back now. Grace pressed her hand to her chest. Later that day, she slipped both drawings into a manila envelope, added her written report, and addressed it to the superintendent of District 8. This time, she didn't wait for someone else to file the paperwork. At home that night, Jack hung Sarah's bus drawing on the fridge for the first time. He didn't turn the photo frames back down. He didn't stay in the garage. Instead, he sat with Lily and Rose on the couch, reading a story about a rabbit who loses her way in the forest, but finds her path again thanks to a lantern carried by another. When the story ended, Lily asked, "Did the rabbit find her mom?" Jack smiled. She found her home. Then he tucked them in, turned off the light, and sat outside on the porch. Rain again. But it sounded different now. Less like pacing. More like peace. The district superintendent's office sat atop a municipal building that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the early 90s. A faded American flag flapped lazily on a rusting pole outside. Grace stood in front of it, manila envelope in hand, debating whether she should walk in or mail it. But something inside her, a voice she hadn't heard since she was 9, and trapped in a school locker gasping through slats, said clearly, "Do it now, before they make you think twice." So she stepped through the door. The receptionist didn't look up right away. Grace cleared her throat. "I need to submit a report. Regarding Leonard Holloway." The woman finally glanced at her eyes, flicking down to the envelope in Grace's hand. "And you are Grace Miller, second-grade teacher, Willow Creek Elementary." That got the receptionist's full attention. "Holloway's on temporary reassignment." "I know. This is a formal filing. It includes statements, artwork, observed behavior patterns, and corroboration from a parent witness." The receptionist reached for the envelope reluctantly. "We'll pass it along." Grace didn't move. "I'd like a time-stamped copy for my records." The woman blinked. Then, with slow annoyance, she slipped the envelope through a scanner and stamped a copy for Grace. As she handed it over, her tone changed. "You know not all complaints end in something. Some people don't like being accused without proof." Grace's hand tightened on the envelope. "Children are proof," she said quietly, "if someone bothers to listen." Then she turned and walked out, heart-pounding. That evening, Jack was sanding the edge of a cabinet door when his phone buzzed. A text from Grace. "He's officially suspended. No buses. No contact with students." He exhaled for what felt like the first time in a week. He didn't reply immediately, just stared at the message, letting it sit in his chest like a small ember of justice. But before he could type a response, another message came in. "There's backlash." At school the next morning, Grace's inbox had 8 new emails. 3 were from fellow teachers, 2 from parents, 1 anonymous, all polite, all veiled, all saying some version of the same thing. "Are you sure you didn't misread the children's behavior? You know how sensitive kids can be these days. We've always found Mr. Holloway to be perfectly kind." Even Principal Evans sent a note asking for a clarifying conversation. She closed her laptop slowly. Fear wasn't in the message, not directly. But she knew what it looked like to be labeled the one who stirred things up, especially in a system built more for consistency than truth. The following week, a school board meeting was scheduled. Parents packed the cafeteria in folding chairs. A podium stood at the front, lit by a single overhead bulb that buzzed faintly. Grace sat near the back jacket folded over her lap, hands cool but steady. Jack arrived late, stood along the side wall, arms folded. When the item appeared on the agenda, temporary personnel reassignment, due to safety concern, the murmurs began. A man stood at the microphone. "My name's Robert Leach. Holloway's driven my 3 boys for years. Never a problem, always early. Brings dog treats for the kids' puppies. This is character assassination." A few people clapped. Another parent rose. "I'm a counselor. Kids act out. They imagine. You plant an idea in their heads and they'll believe it. I worry about setting a precedent where one teacher's hunch can ruin a man's life." Jack felt the back of his neck burn. Then he heard it. Grace's voice, calm, clear, measured. She stood and walked to the front. "I didn't file based on a hunch," she began. I filed based on drawings, repeated behavior, whispers, a fear that couldn't be faked. The room quieted. 2 little girls, Lily and Rose, stopped sleeping through the night. One of them drew a door without a handle. The other asked if it's okay to tell the truth even if no one wants to hear it. She paused, scanning the crowd. We talk about protecting children, but sometimes protection means believing them when it's inconvenient, when it doesn't come with photos or bruises, just fear. Consistent, quiet fear. Jack had never been more proud of anyone in his life. Then he stepped forward too. I'm Jack Turner. I was the first adult who saw them shaking that morning. I watched them refuse to board that bus. I listened when they didn't know how to explain what they felt. He held up one of Lily's drawings. They weren't making it up. And whether or not Mr. Holloway intended harm, they were harmed. A silence fell that felt thicker than any speech. Then a woman in the back, silent until now, stood. My daughter was Madison Albright. Every head turned. I've never told anyone what happened, because I thought no one would care. When she stopped talking, the school said she was difficult. When we moved, we tried to start over. But she still sleeps with the light on, still jumps at closing doors. She held up her phone. A drawing was on the screen. A bus, a black seat, a red X. I thought we were alone, she said, voice trembling. But now I know. We weren't. No one clapped. But something broke open in the room. A crack. A shift. And the silence. The real silence, the kind that keeps people afraid, finally gave way. That night, Jack drove the girls home and tucked them into bed. Before turning out the light, Rose whispered, "Is he gone?" Jack nodded. "Yes. He won't come back." Lily's voice was quieter. "Does that mean she can go too?" Jack blinked. "Who?" "The girl in the red coat. She doesn't have to watch anymore." Jack felt something catch in his throat. "No," he whispered. "She doesn't." He switched off the light. For the first time, the room stayed still. Spring arrived not with fanfare, but with softness, the kind that slipped in on the back of a warm breeze and settled gently on front lawns. For the first time in weeks, the mornings at the bus stop weren't heavy with tension. The yellow school bus still pulled up promptly at 7:42, but now it was driven by Mrs. Clara Benson, a retired driver brought out of early retirement by the district's scramble to repair what had unraveled. She was short, plump, and had silver hair tied into a low braid that smelled faintly of lavender. She greeted each child by name and with a wink, sometimes a joke, sometimes a lollipop. It was not lost on anyone that the first day she returned to driving, Lily and Rose stepped onto the bus without trembling. Jack stood by the curb, arms folded, eyes on the twin girls as they climbed the steps. He didn't breathe until both had turned back to wave at him. He returned the gesture with a soft smile. Clara leaned out the window. "You've got good girls, mister." Turner, she called, voice bright and gravelly. "They've got good courage," he answered. At school, Grace stood in the hallway outside her classroom as the students filed in. A buzz of curiosity lingered in the air. Today was special. On the far wall of the school's main corridor, beneath a large bulletin board titled "Voices That Matter," the custodial staff had mounted a display, a hand-built wooden frame surrounding a single preserved bus seat, painted over, softened with fabric, and stitched with the number 5 in elegant embroidery. Below it, a bronze plaque read, "Sart number 5." For those who sat in silence and found the strength to speak. It had been Jack's idea. He'd quietly reached out to the principal and the PTA. He even offered to build the frame himself for free. No one objected. The idea caught on like a breeze through tall grass. Students brought notes, drawings, stories. Some slipped them under the cushion. Others taped them to the wall. Lily and Rose stood in front of it that morning side by side. They didn't say anything, But when Grace approached, Lily touched the edge of the seat and whispered, "It's not scary anymore." Then she turned and joined her sister in the classroom. Jack visited the school later that afternoon. Grace had invited him casually, but with a tone that suggested it meant something. They stood near the display together, watching as a group of fifth graders passed by. "I never thought it would mean this much to people," Jack said. Grace glanced sideways. "It means a lot because no one talks about fear in public schools unless it comes with a lockdown drill." He nodded slowly. "It's strange, though. I keep wondering what if I hadn't stopped that morning. What if I'd just let them get on?" Grace turned to face him. Then someone else would have had to be brave. But they might not have. He looked at her for a long moment, the hallway noise fading. "You believed them before there was proof." "I believed you," she said softly. There was a quiet between them that felt less like a pause and more like a breath shared between two people learning how to trust again. Then Grace reached into her bag and handed him a folded letter. Came in the mail this morning, from a return address in Oregon. Jack unfolded the envelope. Inside was a single page handwritten in neat cursive. "Dear Ms. Miller, my name is Madison Albright. I saw the article in the paper about seat number 5. I just wanted to say thank you. No one ever believed me. Not even my mom, not really. But when I saw the photo of the girls, their drawings, it felt like my voice finally mattered. Even if it's years later. Please tell them. I'm okay now. I'm in community college. I have a cat named Nova and a part-time job at a bookstore. I still don't ride buses. But I'm not afraid of doors anymore. Thank you for helping them. Thank you for helping me." Jack folded the letter slowly, eyes shining. "She's okay," he murmured. Grace smiled gently. "And she knows she's not invisible anymore." That evening, Grace stopped by Jack's house with a pie she'd baked from scratch apple cinnamon, a pinch of nutmeg, the kind of gesture that didn't come with expectations, only care. The girls were watching a movie in the living room. Jack led her out to the back porch, where the light was fading into deep orange. "You've changed," Grace said after a while. Jack raised an eyebrow. "For the better. I hope more open. Lighter." He exhaled. "I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until it wasn't mine anymore." Grace nodded. "Sometimes the grief we hold isn't just for who we lost, but who we stopped being." He looked at her carefully. "You talk like someone who knows that firsthand." "I do." There was no need to explain more. As the first stars blinked into view above them, Jack lifted his coffee mug in a quiet toast. To second chances. Grace clinked hers against his. And to not wasting them. Across town, the old bus Holloway once drove sat in a district storage lot, overgrown with weeds slated for auction. Inside, dust clung to every surface. But on the 5th seat, faint but still visible, was a single sticker. A heart. Drawn in red crayon. The following Monday, the school bell rang at 8:10 a.m., as it always did, sharp and familiar. Children poured into classrooms with half-zipped jackets, messy ponytails, and spring allergies in tow. But something about that morning felt stiller, not solemn, not tense, just settled like dust that had finally stopped circling in the air. Grace sat at her desk, sipping lukewarm coffee and organizing her lesson materials when Principal Evans knocked lightly and stepped in. He held a manila envelope in one hand, and for once, he wasn't wearing the expression of a man calculating liability. "I thought you might want this," he said, laying the envelope on her desk. Grace eyed it cautiously. "What is it?" "It was addressed to you, care of the district office. Came over internal courier." He turned to leave, then paused. "For the record," he cleared his throat. "You were right." Grace blinked. Evans continued. "I didn't want to admit it because it meant something might have happened on my watch." But you didn't back down. That took more guts than most people have. She offered a quiet nod. Thank you. I'm glad someone finally stood up. Then he left the door clicking shut behind him. Grace opened the envelope. Inside was a thick letter, several pages handwritten in tight, slanted script. A photo paper. Clipped to the top, a young woman, early 20s, smiling awkwardly next to a fluffy black cat perched on her shoulder. The caption scribbled beneath read, "Me and Nova." She thinks she's the boss. Grace smiled before she even read the first line. Dear Ms. Miller, I hope this letter reaches you, and that you remember who I am. My name is Madison Albright. I was in the 2nd grade at Brookfield Elementary in 2018. You probably never met me, but I heard your name from someone who told me what you did. And I saw the photo online, the one with the bus seat. Seat number 5. That seat used to be mine. Grace inhaled slowly. I don't remember everything clearly. I was young, and memory gets tangled when no one believes you. But I remember the sound of the door shutting, the metal clang, the way the windows steamed up when he didn't open them right away. He never hurt me, not with his hands. But he used silence like a weapon. He'd whisper things under his breath. Stop the bus for too long in places that weren't our stops. Say names I didn't recognize. Sometimes he told me to sit in 5 where the red girl sat. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. One day, I stayed too long on the bus. I don't know why. I think I froze. And when the door closed and the engine started again, I remember screaming, but it felt like the sound never made it past my chest. After that, I stopped talking. At school, at home, anywhere. My mom pulled me out of school a week later. We moved states, started over. But some things followed me. For years, I felt like I was making it all up, like I'd invented my own ghost, until I saw Lily's drawing. And I knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. I wasn't invisible. Grace paused, reading hands trembling slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to close her eyes for a moment before continuing. Thank you. Thank you for listening when no one else did. Thank you for believing the whispers, for protecting those girls like no one protected me. I've been in therapy for 2 years. I'm studying early childhood development now, because I want to be the kind of adult I needed when I was 8. Please tell the girls they saved someone they've never met. And if they ever want to talk to someone who gets it, I'm here. Love, Madison. At the bottom, in thick blue ink, was a final sentence circled in red crayon. Sometimes the door has to close before you learn how to open it again. Grace didn't realize she'd been crying until Jack appeared at the door and quietly stepped in. He held a to-go cup of coffee in one hand. You okay? He asked. She nodded and handed him the letter. He read it slowly, the way he read bedtime stories, measured, respectful, like every word mattered. When he finished, he placed the pages back on her desk with care, as though they were sacred. I wish someone had written Sarah a letter like that, he said softly. Grace stepped closer. You know what I think? What she's part of this too. Jack blinked. How do you mean she's the reason you stepped in that morning? The reason you watched, listened, asked questions? She didn't get forgotten, Jack. You carried her into this fight. Jack swallowed hard. Outside the classroom, the bell rang again. Later that afternoon, Grace shared parts of Madison's letter with Lily and Rose, just the pieces that mattered most. The girls sat cross-legged on the carpet as Grace read the sentence. You saved someone you've never met. Rose looked at her sister. Lily whispered, Then she's not stuck anymore. Grace smiled through the lump in her throat. No, she's not. The next day, a new drawing appeared on the Voices That Matter bulletin board. 3 girls. One on each side of the girl in the middle, who wore a red jacket and held hands with both. Below it, in bubble letters, We remember you. You can sit with us. Grace didn't know who had drawn it, but she didn't need to. The morning of the dedication ceremony arrived with a sky like brushed, silver soft light, cool breeze, the kind of weather that made spring feel like a fresh start, rather than just another season. A long wooden bench had been installed at the front lawn of Willow Creek Elementary, just beneath the flowering dogwood tree, where parents often stood, waiting in the afternoons. Built by Jack's hands, and sanded so smooth it practically shimmered, the bench had taken him 3 late nights in the garage to finish. He hadn't told anyone, but the wood came from the tree he and Sarah had planted when she was born. After she died, it had withered. Nothing he did could bring it back. One day last fall, he'd finally cut it down. And now, it lived again. Grace stood beside him watching as a few students walked past, slowing to read the plaque newly affixed to the front, for those who listened when no one else did. It wasn't a memorial. It wasn't even just about Madison. It was about all of them, the silent, the scared, the almost forgotten, and the people who chose at great personal cost to believe what others found inconvenient. Jack ran his hand across the back of the bench. I didn't know if this was the right way. Grace glanced at him. It's the perfect way. He looked down, unsure. It's just a bench. It's more than that. She turned toward him, her voice quieter. It's the place where stories begin again. Jack didn't answer right away, but he stayed close to the edge of his jacket, brushing against hers as students and parents gathered nearby. The ceremony was small by design. A few teachers, the principal, a handful of families, some district staff who'd finally decided to show face, and most importantly, the children. Lily and Rose stood in the front row holding hands. When Grace stepped up to the microphone, her voice didn't need amplification. It carried not with volume, but with conviction. Sometimes we teach kids how to read, she began. How to add, how to write a sentence, a few polite smiles from the crowd. But sometimes, she continued, they teach us how to listen, how to slow down, and hear the things they don't know how to say. She gestured to the bench. This bench isn't about what happened. It's about what we did next, about how we chose to believe, to change, to heal, and how we hope others will too. She stepped back. Then Lily, to everyone's surprise, including Grace, tugged on Rose's hand and walked up to the microphone. Grace moved to stop her, but Jack held up a hand gently. Let her, he said. Lily looked tiny behind the stand, but her voice, when it came, was strong enough to silence the breeze. I used to be scared of the door, she said simply. I thought it meant someone would forget me inside. She paused. But now I know someone always waits on the other side. The crowd stilled. Rose stepped forward and added, and if they don't, then we'll wait for them. Jack wiped his eyes. He didn't even try to hide it. After the ceremony, Grace and Jack sat on the bench together for the first time. The children played in the field. The air smelled of budding leaves and the faint sweetness of baked goods from the nearby staff lounge. I never imagined it would lead here, Grace said. Neither did I, Jack replied. But I'm glad it did. She looked at him. How are you really, Jack thought about it. The grief hadn't disappeared. Sarah's name still caught in his throat some mornings. But the ache had softened, become part of him in a way that no longer suffocated. I'm okay, he said finally, for the first time in a long time. Grace nodded. Me too. Later that afternoon, they walked back to Jack's truck with the twins. The girls raced ahead, giggling, their backpacks bouncing. Grace smiled. They're different now. Lighter. They're safe, Jack said. Because you showed up, she replied. Not just once, every day. He looked over at her, a quiet question in his eyes. Would it be too much to ask you to stay for dinner tonight? She grinned. I was hoping you'd ask. As the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the pavement, Lily and Rose turned to shout something from the sidewalk. Jack didn't catch the words at first. Then Rose cupped her hands around her mouth and yelled, "Seat number 5 is full." Lily echoed her with a laugh, adding, "And the door stays open." Grace chuckled. "That sounds like a promise." Jack smiled, his heart full for the first time in years. "No," he said softly. "That sounds like home." Summer arrived slowly that year, as if even the seasons sensed the need for a gentler pace. The last day of school began with open windows, the scent of freshly mown grass, and that unmistakable blend of excitement and sadness that only comes with saying goodbye. Children buzzed through the halls carrying signed yearbooks, half-used glue sticks, and promises to stay friends forever. Grace stood at the doorway of her classroom, waving as students trickled out one last time. Some hugged her, some high-fived, and a few handed her tiny wrinkled cards that simply said, "Thank you for listening." She saved everyone. When the hallway emptied, she walked back to her desk and sat in silence. The room was still warm with the echoes of children, of laughter, of learning and healing. She looked down at her desk, where Lily and Rose had left a final drawing. This time, no buses, no doors, just a sunlit meadow. 3 girls holding hands. One in red. Beneath it, "We're not scared anymore." Jack stood at the edge of the school parking lot, leaning against his truck, arms crossed. His hair was longer than it had been in years, sun-bleached at the edges. He looked relaxed, in a way that surprised even him. The twins ran toward him, backpacks flapping. Lily jumped into his arms first. Rose wrapped herself around his waist. He bent down and kissed both their foreheads. "You did it," he said. "First full year. I'm proud of you." Lily beamed. "Can we have ice cream?" "Now," Jack laughed. "That's part of the deal." Grace appeared a moment later, waving from across the lot. Jack caught her eye and smiled. "Still coming over tonight," he called. "Wouldn't miss it." That evening, the backyard of Jack's house smelled like grilled chicken, fresh basil and childhood. The picnic table was covered with mismatched plates and paper napkins. Grace had brought her famous pasta salad. The girls had insisted on lemonade with fancy straws. Nova Madison's black cat, now temporarily in Grace's care, while Madison studied abroad, slept curled under the porch swing like she'd always belonged there. Music played low from a Bluetooth speaker. Some old James Taylor song. The sun cast honey-colored light over everything, turning the edges of the world golden. Jack poured Grace a glass of iced tea and sat beside her on the porch steps. "They're happy," she said, watching the girls chase fireflies across the yard. Jack nodded. "They are. Do you ever miss who you were before all of this?" He thought about it. About the man who barely spoke, who avoided people, who lived on routine and silence, who loved once and lost, and thought that was the end of the story. "No," he said, "because I think I found who I was supposed to become." Grace leaned her shoulder into his. "I think I found mine, too." Later, after the dishes were done, and the girls had fallen asleep on the couch in a tangle of limbs and popcorn crumbs, Jack walked Grace to her car. The porch light buzzed softly above them. "I've been thinking," he said. She turned to face him. "About what? About how we started all this with a door?" She smiled gently. "The one on the bus." He nodded. "It closed, and a lot of things were lost because of it." Grace stepped closer. And yet, he repeated, "We're here, still standing, together." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" "Not of grief," he said. "Not of love." Then quietly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand. There was no grand kiss, no swelling music, just fingers intertwined under porch light and moon. A beginning. 1 week later, the school maintenance crew arrived early to pressure wash the front steps for the summer. One of them, Luis, a janitor, who'd worked there 22 years, noticed something unusual. The seat number 5 display, which he dusted every Friday, had a new note tucked beneath the cushion. He pulled it out, eyebrows raised. It was written in soft pencil, childlike and neat. Dear Bench, thank you for not forgetting her. Thank you for helping me feel brave. I'm going to be a teacher one day, just like Ms. Miller. Love, L. Luis wiped his eyes with the corner of his sleeve and smiled. Yeah, he said to the empty hallway. She's gonna do just fine. That afternoon, Jack, Grace, Lily, and Rose drove past the old bus lot on their way to the summer fair. Most of the old buses had been sold or scrapped, but one still remained covered in vines, windows clouded with dust. From the back seat, Rose pointed. That's the one, isn't it? Jack looked. Yeah, I think it is. Lily leaned forward. Can we stop? He glanced at Grace, who nodded. He pulled over. They walked up to the fence together. The girls peered through the chain links. The bus sat silent, almost forgotten, a relic of something dark, but no longer threatening. It looks smaller now, Rose whispered. Grace smiled. That's what happens when you stop being afraid. Then, without a word, Lily took a small sticker from her pocket, a gold star, and slipped it through the fence, letting it fall onto the steps of the bus. It's for her, she said. Madison Grace asked. Lily shook her head. For the girl I used to be. That night, the stars came out slowly. 1, then 3, then dozens. Jack and Grace sat on the porch, swaying the soft creak matching the rhythm of their breathing. Lily and Rose slept upstairs, curled into one bed, dreaming childlike dreams with no shadows behind doors. Grace rested her head on Jack's shoulder. You know what I hear, she whispered. What? He tilted his head. Somewhere in the distance, laughter. Faint. Free. Rolling through the night air like music. He smiled. The sound of children laughing, he said. Grace nodded. The sound of healing. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from today? Leave us a comment below and let us know. Your stories matter too. And if you'd like to join us for more moments like this, quiet stories with deep meaning, feel free to subscribe to our channel. There's always room here for one more heart. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. We're honored to share this journey with you. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never stop listening.